what I believe in without the fear of hindrance from anyone or the government.
Freedom also means that one must bear the responsibility of such actions. If one chooses to make the decision for, say, to smoke or to drink, they must also take the responsibility for those actions, which may be, most likely, negative. This is how freedom ties into the belief of personal responsibility. Living in Canada, as a Muslim, I am forever grateful for my religious freedom, which the country values so highly. I feel safe to practice where I'm speaking right now in Jamaat Khana, or a mosque to some people. However, there are many types of freedom, and religious freedom is just one of those freedoms. Another one of those freedoms is economic freedom. And economic freedom is the ability to exchange goods and services without the fear or hindrance of, again, a government or anyone else. And one of the most important parts of economic freedom is trade. And in our curriculum, we learned how trade was one of the most successful parts of India and Africa. Indian Ocean trade routes between the 15th and 16th century are an example of economic freedom. During this time, the region's commercial output increased many times, and maritime trade benefited everyone from all countries and all nations. The freedom vested within these merchants created a new prosperity and new standards of living for everyone in the region. Peoples of different ethnicities and cultures are brought together in the spirit of entrepreneurship. People who would have never cooperated in the first place are brought together for one common cause, and that is to produce products for themselves, for their families, and as a result, people have been brought out of a vast amount of poverty. So I ask you the question, what do you think the government's role is when it comes to freedom? Is it to protect your freedom, or is it to give you your freedom? To me, I think these two things are very different. I think that the government does not give you your freedom. Your freedoms come from beyond the government. The founding fathers of the United States thought it came from God, but whether you believe in God or not is irrelevant. It is that you are born with certain unalienable rights. For me, this is why the government's role is not to give you your freedom, but is to protect your freedom. This is why the rights are to be considered unalienable. Reading from the Constitution of the United States, which is the oldest constitution still in use today, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's clear that the founding fathers of the United States agreed that freedom is unalienable amongst all individuals. And they understood that everyone defines happiness differently. When they said the pursuit of happiness, they didn't say, we will give you happiness, but they allowed us to pursue happiness, because each individual is different, and each individual may make different choices, such as to drink or to smoke, and that each individual must bear the responsibility of those choices. Some challenges to freedom today are the same challenges that were 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago as well. During the Mongol conquests, millions were killed as a tactic of war. Genghis Khan made populations submit to him as long as they gave to his doctrine. He didn't care about what they did or what they thought as long as they went along in his war games. I would argue that this is an insidious way of stripping away freedom, and this is still occurring today. There are those who don't have freedoms in other parts of the world. We are very fortunate where we live today. However, particularly in perhaps Saudi Arabia or other countries, people are not given their freedoms based off of certain things that they were born with, such as their gender, race, sexuality, etc. There are those who seek to strip your freedoms under the false promise of utopia, or who want to sacrifice your freedom under the banner of safety. However, I would argue that this is the reason why tyrants come into power. This is why, in the 20th century, over 200 million people were killed at the hands of their own government. And this is known as Democide. Similar to genocide, it is the mass murder of people. However, this was done by their own government. A lack of freedom makes any population subject to slavery or a slave, at any possible moment. Look what happens when there are those who make promises, such as Adolf Hitler, who promised to bring Germany, after the Treaty of Versailles, out of a Great Depression, or other countless examples of tyrants, when they promise to take away your freedoms, but then they become tyrants. And it is because we know people do not seek to strip away your freedom with the purpose of relinquishing freedom, but they seek to strip away your freedom with the purpose of gaining power. Freedom can be taken away at any moment. And as Ronald Reagan has said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And this is why I believe it is up to my generation to renew the freedom which is endowed by us from our creators. Because if we do not have that freedom, then we are basically subjects. And freedom is what makes the difference between a citizen and a subject. Some people see taking away freedom as a positive thing, such as when excessive government spying, or the war on drugs, or gun control even perhaps. They see that, well, in the name of safety, and we know what's better for you than you do. However, I find this to be a very dangerous idea, for when we give away our freedoms, we give away consent to what we do and how we live. I would argue that the government should only have powers that you would be willing to give to the most vile of human beings you can ever imagine. Not because those in power are currently evil, but if history is any indicator, evil men will find a way into power. I would say that the best way to protect freedom is to exercise it. This is why I encourage us all to exercise our religious, economic, and social freedom. As if it is taken away from you, there will be no one to stand up for us. Another way to protect freedom would be the right to self-defense. Adolf Hitler has said, the most foolish mistake we could make would be to allow the inferior races to possess weapons. And of course, he was referring to the 6 million Jews he murdered and the 6 million other people he did as well in his empire. And the founding fathers of the United States knew this, and this has been well thought out throughout history. They knew that the Constitution, your rights, which are guaranteed to you, are just a piece of paper. They can be ignored, and the paper can be burned. And there's nothing that is going to stop a man with a gun and a man with the willingness to take power. And this is why the Second Amendment has a place in the 21st century here in the Western world. The Second Amendment of the United States reads that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Though controversial, it does have a purpose. It is to ensure that citizens have the means to defend their freedoms when the government ignores it. And government ignoring your freedom and taking it away from you is no new thing. It's existed since the earliest of empires. When a population is oppressed and has access to arms, they can defend their freedom. Seljuk nomadic warriors were hired by the Ghaznavids to help them battle against the oppressive Abbasid Empire. Treated badly by the leadership for the population, they hired the guns of the empire. They were considered inferior by this empire. However, they rose against it and managed to create new freedom and prosperity for themselves. Similarly, the Janissary warriors of the Ottoman Empire were once slave men. However, once they accessed their rights to defend themselves, they were no longer slaves. However, this was not something that I'm talking about 1,000 years ago. This happened before many of you were born, and after many of you were born. Modern history is full of examples of populations that once disarmed were at the mercy of those in power. In 1938, Hitler passed the Germans' Weapon Act, which prohibited Jews from owning any weapons of any sort. He proceeded to murder 11 million people. Now, could Hitler have murdered 11 million armed citizens while simultaneously taking on the Russians from the east and the British and the Americans from the west? We don't know, but certainly it would be much harder to commit genocide when the barrel is pointed in another direction. Stalin confiscated weapons of peasants before he introduced collective farming into the Soviet Union, which murdered over 20 million people. Pol Pot took the weapons of civilians to fund his own army and turned the weapons against them, where he proceeded to kill 3 million people. Dictator Marcos of the Philippines gave citizens 2 weeks to turn in all firearms before he introduced martial law into the nation and tortured and murdered over 70,000 people. This indicates a need to defend your right to freedom, As controversial as it may seem, it's necessary. Not that those in power in Canada, where I'm speaking today, are taking away your power, but you have no guarantee that your freedom will be protected in 10 years, or your children's freedom in 50 years, or their children in 100 years. Benjamin Franklin said that democracy is like two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. The more I read, the more I research, and the more I understand the past, the less I can trust those in power with my freedom, it is this majority rule and mob rule. If we can protect the rights of the individual, if we cannot protect the rights of the individual, we cannot protect the rights of anyone, except those who seek to control others, which is why it is necessary to arm that lamb and give it its freedom in democracy. Thank you.